After quite some build-up, beginning in 1 Chronicles with David's provision of materials and a design, plus the choosing of the location, we are now at the point where Solomon commences the building work. Great emphasis is put on the quality and quantity of the materials and the craftsmanship. As we have seen before, it is curious what the chronicler includes and what he leaves out. Sometimes he follows the stories known to us from 2 Samuel and 1 Kings, or he compresses them, but sometimes there is material he has got from somewhere else, and some of his details do not always agree. It is helpful to remember that the chronicler's situation is quite different from whoever wrote or finished putting together the books of 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 and 2 Kings. He is part of the community which returned from exile and rebuilt the temple, and as Ezra records, it is not as glorious as Solomon's. They do not have a king, and the governor is appointed by the Persians. Perhaps some of the differences in detail then reflect his uncertainty. Or perhaps he has some other literary theological motive. For example, the twin pillars Jachin and Boaz are almost twice the height of those described in 1 Kings 7 and 2 Kings 25. Did he not know their height, or was this hyperbole? Some scholars think that the chronicler added up the numbers from the description in 1 Kings, which was 18 cubits high, 12 in circumference, and the capital was 5. All of that comes to 35. Some have suggested that he was referring to their combined height, which is presumably why the NIV adds the word together here. But the mystery deepens when we read the Old Greek translation of Jeremiah 52:21, which agrees with the chronicler that the height was 35 cubits, whilst the Hebrew of the same verse says 18, agreeing with 1 and 2 Kings. What is also noteworthy is the lack of attention the chronicler gives to these 2 pillars. 1 Kings 7 devotes 119 words to their description, but the chronicler gives only 43. Scholars have guessed at his lack of interest in them, but I think the most likely explanation is the fact that they did not feature either in the rebuilt temple of his time nor in the later one Herod constructed. The simple point is that the chronicler's temple did not have them, and so they didn't matter as much. This again highlights the difference in his situation. Another strange problem the chronicler presents us with is the position of the cherubim. He describes them as standing side by side, one wing touching another, and the outer wings touching the respective walls. This is what we also find in 1 Kings 6. But the chronicler adds that the cherubim faced outwards towards the court. In Exodus 25, we read that the cover for the ark has the cherubim built into it, and so they cover it with their wings from their position at either end, and that they're facing each other. The rabbis notice this, and there is a discussion in the Talmud. One rabbi proposed that when Israel was obedient, the cherubim faced inwards towards each other, signifying harmony. But when Israel disobeyed, they face outwards towards the court. Though they don't elaborate, it is probably this posture of facing those who enter which emphasizes their role as sanctuary guardians, which is how they were used in the Near East. Again, we are left to guess, but as both 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles describe Solomon as building these cherubim, it may be that he constructed 2 new freestanding ones to guard the ark, which had the original pair on it. Also eyebrow-raising is the amount of gold mentioned in verse 8 used for the most holy place. 600 talents of gold is over 20 tons. This is 5 times the amount gifted by the Queen of Sheba and was almost the amount Solomon received annually. We are again faced with the interpretive question: is this figure literal or symbolic? The amount is not mentioned in 1 Kings, but the annual revenue of gold is. The chronicler knows this huge figure as he reproduces it in chapter 9, and it might be that he wishes to suggest that Solomon dedicated a year's worth of gold to this one room alone, to signify its importance and Solomon's reverence. David also paid 600 shekels for the site, and so the chronicler may have had that figure in mind as well. Also, 600 divides by 50 into 12, matching the 12 tribes, and possibly implying the equal share all Israel has in God. But again, we are left to guess. The chronicler has also invested this story with other meanings via links to the Torah. The first verse mentions that the building site, while still certainly being the place David designated, was on Mount Moriah, a detail not found in the 1 Kings version. This makes the link with Abraham's binding of Isaac in Genesis 22, remembering his great trust in God, which James 2:21 identified as the proof of Abraham's faith, and the key point that God will provide for himself the sacrifice. With other details, the chronicler draws links to Exodus, such as the mention of the curtain and the fact that the priests wash in the basin, or the bronze altar described in 4:1. His aim is not just to point out meaningful things, but to highlight the continuity between the tabernacle of Moses and the temple of Solomon. The continuity between the work which David began but Solomon completed is also noted at the conclusion, which is found in the first verse of chapter 5. And indeed, as we saw in his response to God in chapter 1, Solomon understands his role as taking on the things which God promised to his father David. Thus, Solomon does not focus on himself. All his glory and achievements are for the sake of David, who was in turn chosen and blessed by God for the sake of God's people. The massive use of gold and other fine materials certainly indicate reverence and significance, but the true, deeper value of these things lies behind them, in promises, choices, faithfulness, and presence. This is something Solomon understood very well.